Hello, good evening. Welcome back to another installment of Trek Talk, where I'll be taking a look at one of the episodes from the original Star Trek series. This is covering it's Shore Leave, which is episode 17 in production order. Okay, this episode is written by Theodore Sturgeon and directed by Robert Spar. And along with giving my thoughts on the episode, I'll also be taking a look at some behind the scenes information, reading from Mark Cushman's book, These Are the Voyages. So I'll now read from an NBC press release, which was issued on December 6th, 1966. While searching for a suitable rest area in which members of the USS Enterprise crew may take much needed furloughs, a landing party discovers an eerie fantasy land in Shore Leave on NBC Television Network's colorcast of Star Trek. At first more bemused than frightened by the amusement park atmosphere of the supposedly uninhabited planet, Captain Kirk sees no immediate menace to his ship and crew. However, the strange land soon poses a serious threat when Kirk's scouting party disappears with his ship's power and his ship's power source is lost. In this wonderland, McCoy sees a girl named Alice being followed by a giant talking rabbit. Sulu, who likes collecting antique weapons, finds a revolver, fully loaded, and is chased by a samurai warrior. Lieutenant Rodriguez and Specialist Teller are chased by a World War II era fighter plane. Yeoman Tanya Barrows, who believes in fairy tales and storybook romance, sees and is attacked by Don Juan, prompting McCoy, who believes in chivalry, to come to her defense. And then he is attacked by a knight in armor on a stallion. And Kirk, who fondly remembers the days at Starfleet Academy before he carried so much weight on his shoulders, meets and receives a sock in the jaw from an old upperclassman and practical jokester named Finnegan, and a different type of smack, this time to the heart, from Ruth, the girl he left behind. The hook: dreams and nightmares sleep side by side, so be careful what you wish for while in a world where wishes can come true. Okay. Theodore Sturgeon's very original screenplay plays like a roller coaster ride, seamlessly winding its way through dips and peaks with an abundance of thrills along the way. While the fantasy elements of the story may have been too fantastic for NBC's liking, Shore Leave gave the network exactly what Roddenberry had promised: a planet show with action and adventure. We meet Ruth, Kirk's first love. Thanks to on the mark acting choices by William Shatner, Kirk appears intoxicated with feelings of both fondness and heartache. The mere presence of Ruth, her touch and scent both comfort and torment him. Notice how quickly the mood of the episode shifts. Credit the beautiful music of Gerald Fried and the stunned and reflective look on Shatner's face for making Kirk's reunion with Ruth such a memorable one. Equally emotional is the death of Dr. McCoy, another superb acting choice on the part of William Shatner. The script called for a push in extremely rapidly on Kirk's reaction of pure horror. Shatner instead gave us a tortured expression as Kirk is overwhelmed with grief to the point of appearing physically ill. The combination of strong performances by Nimoy, Takei, and guest star Emily Banks create a scene that is as heartfelt as it is gripping. And they make a good point here in the book, which it really hadn't occurred to me. So back in December of 1966, few knew that in the world of science fiction, anything is possible and that McCoy might return from the dead. DeForest Kelley was not listed in the opening credits at this point. He was just a supporting character, and much like Janice Rand had been. And it was entirely possible that, like Rand, he might just be written off the show. So when McCoy is pronounced dead, the audience at the time seeing this for the first, airing of it might think that he really is dead and that he's not coming back. They might have a reason to believe that. So it probably had a lot more impact when it happened when the show first aired. When this episode first aired, the shock and remorse of witnessing the death of McCoy was intense. It was very clear just how vital McCoy and DeForest Kelly had become to the show. Uh, Teller also dies in the story. She too is repaired, but due to a lack of camera coverage from director Robert Spar, you'll need to watch it closely. But she does return to Rodriguez's side for the final moments of the episode. The fight between Kirk and Finnegan is noteworthy. The choreography and stunt work are as good as television got in this era. One can feel both Kirk's determination and physical exhaustion. Gerald Fried's score speeds up and then slows down to a crawl in sync with the energy of the fight and the fatigue of the combatants. Adding to all of this, the scenery for a 1966 television series with a budget uh, reduced to 187,000 per episode, although Shore Leave would go over that by 12,000, is unparalleled. The story takes on a dreamlike effect as the eerie backdrop of this strange world changes from lush and tropical to barren and harsh, and as characters from the subconscious mind pop in and out of the surreal terrain. Moments like these elevate Shore Leave into the stratosphere of TOS's very best. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll get into this episode itself. All right, so the Enterprise, the show opens with the Enterprise in orbit around an unidentified planet. Um, Kirk on the bridge complains of a sore back and gets a brief massage from Yeoman Barrows. It's a pretty funny little comical moment where he complains, and then while Spock is behind him, then Barrows comes up and starts rubbing his back, and Kirk thinks that it's Spock who's massaging him until Spock steps forward and he realizes it isn't. And one has to think that this would have been Rand if Grace Lee Whitney had not been written out of the show. I talked about her leaving the show when I talked about, I think it was Conscience of the King. And Spock notes that Kirk, like the rest of the crew, needs rest as their last 3 months have been particularly grueling. Spock himself accepted, of course. The Enterprise has begun beaming personnel down to the planet for shore leave to touch grass, as it were. The planet is uninhabited and idyllic, a good place for the Enterprise crew to relax for a while. And we see McCoy and Sulu enjoying the scenery while taking a stroll. McCoy mentions that this place is like something out of Alice in Wonderland. Sulu goes off to take some samples of the plant life, which is a nice bit of consistency because they had mentioned Sulu having an interest in botany, I think, all the way back in Charlie X, if I remember correctly. McCoy wanders off and encounters a large talking white rabbit right out of Alice in Wonderland and is soon followed by Alice herself, who asks McCoy if he's seen the rabbit, and McCoy points her in the right direction. He then calls for Sulu and asks if Sulu saw them, which, of course, he didn't. Uh, Now, on the Enterprise, Kirk suggests that Spock go down for some R&R, but Spock declines, noting that it's illogical to expend energy running around on the planet while claiming that it's rest. McCoy then calls and tells Kirk about his encounter with the White Rabbit, and Kirk thinks this is all some sort of a joke and he just dismisses it. Then Spock notes that there is one crewman whose health has been declining and rest has been recommended for him, but he refuses. And of course, Kirk won't stand for this and orders that this crewman take some shore leave to relax and beam down to the planet and asks who it is. And of course, it's Kirk himself. And Spock, supposedly being devoid of emotion, takes an inordinate amount of enjoyment in tripping up Kirk on this. He's literally like, gotcha. I gotcha. I mean, come on. Kirk couldn't see that coming. He's supposed to be smart. Kirk notes that the peaceful environment should pose no problems. Now, back on the planet, crew members Rodriguez and Teller are enjoying the scenery when Kirk and Yeoman Barrows beam down. They find McCoy, who shows them a pair of large rabbit tracks. Kirk calls the Enterprise and cancels shore leave until the mystery around the White Rabbit is solved. When they hear gunshots, and then they run off to investigate. And there's a really cool shot here. There's a couple of them in the episode, these kind of tracking shots where they're off in the distance and they take off running and the camera kind of pans along with them. It looks really good. It looks very cinematic. And I mean, I'm not an expert, but from what little I remember of the 1960s era shows I've seen, and it's been a while, probably since I've really watched any other than Star Trek. I don't really remember any shots of this kind of type. Okay, so they eventually find the source of the gunshots, and it is Sulu who has found a pistol. And he's been taking shots with the handgun, which seems highly irresponsible. I mean, they're on this planet, and Sulu knows there are other members of the crew down here on shore leave, and yet he's just sort of firing a gun off randomly. It's like, yeah, that is not safe. Not good gun safety. And Kirk is annoyed to say the least, and he confiscates the gun from Sulu. Then they see more rabbit tracks, and Kirk tells Sulu and Barrows to follow the tracks to see where they lead, while he and McCoy try to backtrack and follow them in the other direction. And as Kirk and McCoy are walking, we see an antenna of some sort pop up and start tracking them. As they're walking, Kirk mentions how when he was at Starfleet Academy, there was an upperclassman named Finnegan who bullied him and made Kirk the brunt of numerous practical jokes. Then they find the rabbit tracks, and they find Alice's tracks as well. But the girl's tracks and the rabbit tracks diverge. So Kirk tells McCoy, I believe he follows the girl while Kirk continues to follow the rabbit, I think, or backtrack the rabbit's tracks. And as he's tracking them, he encounters Finnegan, who is annoying as hell with his constant cackling and his over the top Irish accent. Yeah, I mean, Finnegan has got to be the one of the most over the top parodies of an Irishman that's ever been committed to film. I mean, it's so over the top, it's ridiculous. So then he promptly socks Kirk in the jaw and then challenges him to a fight. And Kirk starts to reciprocate, but then there's a scream. Kirk, hearing it, then turns and runs away, leaving Finnegan behind. He and McCoy link up while they're running to investigate, and they find Barrows, who is disheveled with her uniform torn. And she claims that she was attacked by Don Juan. Let's see. She says that Sulu chased Don Juan away. So Kirk tells McCoy to stay with Barrows while he searches for Sulu and Don Juan. And as he's doing this, again, one of those antennas pops up and tracks Kirk. Kirk comes to an area where he finds some flowers and he stops to admire them. He smiles as they seem to remind him of something. And then he encounters Ruth, a woman that he loved years ago back when he was at the academy. He asks her how she could be here on this world, but she just replies that none of that matters. Rodriguez then calls Kirk and says that he saw a flock of birds. Now, their sensor readings said that there was no animal life on this planet, so the birds shouldn't be here. Kirk tells Rodriguez to inform all the remaining personnel to rendezvous at the glade where they all beamed up. Then Spock calls and tells Kirk that there is an energy field of some kind at work on the planet, possibly beneath it, and it is starting to drain the Enterprise's power, and it's impacting their systems, including communications. One of those antennas pops up again and tracks McCoy and Yeoman Barrows. She mentions that the forest makes her feel like a fairy tale princess. And she's awfully chipper considering that, she was just more or less sexually assaulted just a few minutes earlier by someone when they're on a planet that's supposed to be uninhabited. I mean, there's not much curiosity about where did this guy come from? How could he be here? But then they see a princess costume hanging on a nearby plant, and McCoy urges her to try it on. Then Rodriguez calls to tell McCoy about the rendezvous at the Glade, but then they lose touch with each other as communications begin to go out. And then Rodriguez and Teller are confronted by a toiga, which wandered over from the set of Doctari, I guess. I don't know. Then Sulu gets attacked by a samurai. All right, hold on. Let me. Yeah, here we go. Sulu is attacked by a samurai. He tries to phaser the attacker, but his phaser doesn't work. So he flees, and then he encounters Kirk, and he tells Kirk about his phaser not working. So Kirk tries his phaser and finds that it doesn't work either. Then Spock beams down because the communicators have now gone out and are no longer working. And he informs Kirk that the energy field is getting stronger, that in addition to communications, the transporter is now starting to be drained and will soon be useless. McCoy and Barrows arrive at the Glade, but no one else is there. And then they're confronted by a knight on horseback who charges at them. McCoy insists that these things they're seeing are illusions and can't be real. Never mind that, Barrows said that she was attacked by this thing, and clearly it touched her because her uniform's torn. But McCoy stands his ground, and he is impaled and killed by the knight's lance. Of course, we don't see that. This is 1960s broadcast TV, of course. Kirk and Spock arrive just in time to see McCoy killed. Then the knight turns on them and charges, and since their phasers don't work, Kirk, and I thought this was a good bit of a callback in the episode. It's the what's the uh was it Hitchcock who had the rule, or was it Chekhov, the playwright, or Chekhov? When you introduce a gun in the first act, you better use it at some point. It better figure into the story, and so it does here. Is Kirk pulls out the gun he confiscated from Sulu and he shoots the knight, seemingly killing him. But then they go over to McCoy and find that he is dead. And, you can see it. He has a wound in his chest as if he has been impaled by the lance. Then the figure in the armor turns out to be some sort of a mannequin. Spock examines it with his tricorder and discovers that it is made of the same, as he says, same cellulose based material as the plant life. He speculates that all the strange things they've been seeing are being manufactured somewhere, possibly underground, from this material. Then a World War II era fighter plane comes flying through the sky and attacks Rodriguez and Teller. And Teller is seemingly killed by the plane when it fires on them. At least that's kind of the assumption. I mean, what really seems to happen is, they're running and Rodriguez is pulling her, along with him, and she literally seems to run into a tree and just like fall unconscious. But I guess she was supposed to be shot by the plane. Now, Kirk and the others see the plane flying through the sky and watch it for a few moments, but then Sulu realizes that the bodies of both McCoy and the knight have vanished. Spock then asks Kirk what he was thinking of when he had his encounters, and Kirk says that he was thinking of his academy days. And then Finnegan reappears, just as annoying as before. Kirk demands answers, but Finnegan just laughs and runs off. Kirk tells Spock and Sulu to find McCoy's body, and then he chases off after Finnegan. And Spock is just left alone, like, seriously, bro? He eventually chases Finnegan down, and Finnegan attacks him, and they proceed to beat the crap out of each other, what seems like the better part of an afternoon. But eventually, Kirk wins out and puts Finnegan on the ground, seemingly unconscious. Then Spock arrives and asks Kirk if he's enjoying himself with all this mindless violence. Kirk realizes that he is, and that when he saw Finnegan, all he wanted to do was beat the crap out of Finnegan. Spock speculates that somehow their thoughts are being read, and then the things they think of are being manufactured, presumably underground, and this facility is producing the energy field that they detected. Spock urges that they be careful of what they think of, and then no sooner does he say that than the tiger reappears. And then the fighter plane, and then the samurai, who are just, and they seriously, they just sort of shove the samurai out of the way. I mean, he's barely even an obstacle to them. Don Juan then reappears and attacks Barrows again. Sulu and Rodriguez confront him, but then he flees when Kirk and Spock arrive. Then Kirk tells them all to stand at attention and try not to think of anything, but to clear their minds. And then this guy shows up and tells them that this planet is an amusement park created for the entertainment of their race, and explains how, basically Spock's theory was correct. This place is able to read your mind and then produce what you think of. And he apologizes for any of the harm or anything that's been done. And Kirk, of course, is very upset about the death of McCoy. And then McCoy reappears saying he's fine, and mentions that he was taken underground to the facility where they manufacture all this stuff. And this is, to me, one of the kind of plot holes in the episode. I mean, they have, presumably they have some kind of like 3D printers, right? That kind of produce these things. Okay, fine. But that doesn't explain how they brought McCoy back to life, because he was impaled through the chest and dead, wasn't he? They don't really explain that very well. And there's also, and this is, I guess, just an editing issue, but there's really no mention of Teller, who was also presumably killed. Now, the caretaker assures Kirk that they meant no harm and tells them that if they're simply careful with their thoughts, the planet can provide endless amusement for them. So Kirk tells the Enterprise to commence beaming personnel down for shore leave. Afterward, on the bridge, hello, Harvey's Vintage Audio. Thank you for stopping by, sir. Remember Fight Club? I want to fight William Shatner. Yeah, it is kind of like Fight Club, isn't it? And I don't blame him for wanting to fight Finnegan. Finnegan's annoying as hell, man. He is he is ridiculous. No worries. Oh yeah, sure. Thank you. And anyway, afterwards on the bridge, Spock asks them if they enjoyed their shore leave, and they assure him that they did. And Spock just laments the rampant illogic of it all, and the episode ends there. So it's a fun episode overall. Definitely one of the better Star Trek episodes. Of course, since then there have been, I don't know, numerous, probably too many to really go into, sort of riffs on this sort of thing, and really one can see this as almost like an extrapolation, or rather can see the holodeck in Next Generation and other Star Trek shows as kind of an extrapolation of this, where you're in this environment where your environment is creating these things that are dangerous to you and you can't get away from them. But even with some of the flaws that it has, it is definitely a classic episode. I'll give it an A minus. I think that's fair. And Harvey's Vintage Audio says, my favorite episode is Planet on the Edge of Forever. Yeah, that is definitely a favorite. Definitely one that is arguably the most critically acclaimed since it won an Emmy for best teleplay. Although it is worth noting that the it wasn't the teleplay that aired. Of course, when writer Harlan Ellison submitted the teleplay for City on the Edge of Forever, there were a number of differences, and the episode had to be extensively rewritten for a number of reasons, partly for expense, partly for time, and also because there were things that just really didn't fit in Star Trek. In the original teleplay, the whole crisis, instead of McCoy going back in time, there's another crewman, I forget his name, who is basically dealing drugs on the Enterprise, and he beams down to the planet to escape after he gets caught. And he's the one who goes back and screws up time, and Kirk and Spock have to go back and fix it. And it's that original teleplay that won the Emmy, not the version that actually aired. I don't know how many people really realize that. I might do an episode. I've thought about doing because there's a comic book version of that original teleplay. I think it was done by IDW Comics, I think. And I've actually considered doing an episode of Trek Talk on that original screenplay. Oh, thank you. You just subscribed. Thank you very much. Yeah, I've seen subscriptions pick up a bit. I'll just go ahead and take a moment here to plug one of my recent videos. You know, I produced an AI trailer for the Thundar the Barbarian, kind of like an updated trailer, a live action trailer for Thundar the Barbarian that has done really well for me, and that's really caused a lot of people to sub. So, but thank you for subscribing. And he says, I only ever really watched the first series. Yes, some folks do. Okay. Let me go ahead and get back to Cushman's book here, and we'll talk about some behind the scenes material here. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Okay, so the basic idea for shore leave, and this is from Cushman's book, is in Gene Roddenberry's March 1964 series proposal. Roddenberry handed the clever but vague concept off to Theodore Sturgeon, who at 48 was a science fiction legend, best known for his book More Than Human, which was published in 1953. Roddenberry, thrilled to have a writer of Sturgeon's caliber on his team, later reflected, quote, up until then, he had always been a writer of great novels. Someone said to him, Ted, I understand that you are doing Star Trek now. Don't you know that 90% of everything on television is crap? And allegedly, Ted rose up and grandly said, 90% of everything is crap. Sturgeon's story treatment, which is more like an abbreviated and disjointed short story, arrived on Roddenberry's desk May 10th of 1966. Robert Justman got a look at it and was appalled. He wrote to John D.F. Black, what are we going to do about this story? Having just finished a memo on Harlan Ellison's story, I am in no condition to go through this one yet. Because the original screenplay, as is often the case with these things, and I talked about this in my the last episode talking about what was it, the Menagerie Part 2, which is, you know, they had a bit of a problem with the writers on the show because the writers who were writing the episodes, they tended to be either sort of TV writers who mostly did straightforward drama or perhaps westerns and that sort of thing, and didn't really know science fiction and didn't really know how to work well within that genre, or they were sci-fi writers who were accustomed to writing novels and short stories and had great ideas but didn't understand how to sort of write within the confines or the restrictions of a TV budget or a TV shooting schedule. And this was one of those examples. There was just way too much in the original screenplay. For example, there are scenes where Trapdoors open up in the ground, and these mechanical arms come out and take the bodies underground. And McCoy, after he's quote unquote killed and goes underground, we actually got scenes with him where he wakes up in this underground facility where everything is manufactured, and all that had to be cut. And Harvey's Vintage Audio also likes The Paradise Syndrome, another classic to be sure. Okay, now they go through here about quite a bit about all the rewrites, and I'm not going to go through it step by step because it's just too long. Okay, John D.F. Black later said, "My favorite part of the job was also the toughest part, which was dealing with the writers." And Harvey says, "Sad ending though." Yeah, yeah. I mean, a few do. A few Star Trek episodes do end on sour notes, which again was kind of I think kind of an unusual thing at the time. Most shows would tend to have more of a positive or upbeat ending, where everything turns out okay. Um, which was dealing with the writers. The intimidation of sitting down with Theodore Sturgeon, who was at that time the most anthologized writer in the English language, as far as I was told. Uh, I didn't know a lot of science fiction, but I believed it. The man was an adorable human being, but his mind was absolutely incredible. We came to the conclusion that he was definitely from outer space, and he was just visiting here. He could talk, he could speak the language, he could do everything like a normal human being, but he wasn't. So that was wonderful. And at the time, it was also terrifying. And hail Adega. Thank you for stopping by, sir. Always good to see you. And I caught you earlier today on Loki's stream. Uh, and I heard on there that Loki is with his in laws, right? Have you heard anything from Loki since then? I meant to message him earlier, but I got busy with other things and I forgot to do it. I hope he and Eris are okay. Okay. Sturgeon did his contractually required rewrite, delivering most of the pages on September 8th, with the balance the following day. Roddenberry and Kuhn put their heads together and came with the answers they both liked to solve the problems with the script. As for the theme, it was sharpened to make the statement that fantasies can prove to be harmful if not kept in check, and this would be revealed at the end. Kuhn took a turn at the writing with revised pages dated on October 17th. Stan Robertson read Kuhn's handling of the script. Many of the NBC man's previous reservations had been resolved, but one still remained. In a phone call to Roddenberry, not Kuhn, Robertson expressed his concern over the more fantastic elements of the story. To receive network acceptance, those elements had to be toned down. Oh, okay. So you say he is near Austin temporarily. They are okay. Okay, well that's good. Um, yeah, I mean that's good to hear. Like they did. I hope their house didn't get flooded or anything. But apparently this wasn't as bad as Harvey. Um, I'm assuming because of course, well, I don't know if you'll remember, Dig, if you're not in Texas, but the Texas National Guard statewide got mobilized for relief efforts for Hurricane Harvey, and I was part of that. I went down there for I think about 3 weeks to help with hurricane relief, and I haven't heard anything about any mobilization, so I guess it wasn't so bad this time. But anyway, getting back to this, so apparently one of the main things is that they didn't like the whole thing with the White Rabbit, and NBC wanted that changed or cut out or something like that. Just power outages. Yeah, I did see that on the news that a lot of folks are out of power. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, while the rewriting process continued, Robert Justman was arranging locations for Shore Leave. This was only the second episode to shoot on location rather than on a soundstage, with Miri being the first. The primary site was Africa, USA, a wildlife preserve 40 miles north of Los Angeles. The secondary location, Vasquez Rocks, was less than a half hour's drive from the first. Both properties at that time were owned and operated by Ralph Helfer, a highly proficient animal trainer for film and TV, and his wife, Tony. Oh, and Harvey's Vintage Audio said, my father got William Shatner's autograph when he met him at the BBC here in London. But when he passed, we sold his autograph books at an auction and forgot to remove William Shatner's autograph. Oh, dang, that's a shame. When was that? Was that back in, was that recently or maybe back in like the 80s or 90s or something? Okay, so Robert Spar was hired to direct. Yeah, what a bummer. Yeah, indeed. Robert Spar was hired to direct and began his career on TV's Lassie. He then moved to Warner Brothers, where he was assigned episodes of Cheyenne, Bronco 77, Sunset Strip, and Hawaiian Eye. He was also a film editor, having cut several episodes of The Wild Wild West, as well as directing for that series. In 1966, he proved good at fast paced action sequences with The Rat Patrol. Oh, the 80s. Okay. Yeah, so a while back. That's too bad. Yeah, I remember the Rat Patrol. I liked that show as a kid. I thought those Jeeps with the machine guns mounted in them were just really cool. Emily Banks was selected to play Yeoman Tanya Barrows, and she began taking modeling jobs to help pay tuition for her schooling in Boston. Business administration was her planned vocation, but those modeling jobs brought unexpected dividends. In 1960, Banks won the title of Miss Rheingold and appeared in advertisements for that beer brand, and that led to steady work in both print and TV ads. She said, quote, I was living in New York by then. I guess I had the right look for that time. I did 16 Alcoa commercials for vinyl flooring and about 17 or 18 commercials for Salem cigarettes. I did Pepsodent and every Procter and Gamble thing you could think of. I used to get hired to do some of the new fashions too when they would do a showing because they wanted an all American look. Eventually, I had to leave New York because I had 38 commercials on the air and I was so saturated that I couldn't do anymore. So I came out here and signed with Universal in 66. Nadega says, I love the Wild Wild West. Yeah, yeah, I liked that show too when I was a kid. Um, although some of the gadgets that they had were certainly fanciful for what was it like 18 like a late 1800s technology. I mean, they had plastic explosives and stuff like that. I mean, they had gadgets that James Bond would have envied. Universal got its money out of Banks, putting her to work in 5 productions in a single year, including The Plainsman, Gunfight in Abilene. Let's see, a couple other things. So, once free of her studio contract, Banks picked a slew of Los Angeles TV ads before getting a reading at Star Trek. And Harvey's Vintage Audio agrees with me on the gadgets. Yeah. And of course, since that was a show that was on at the same time, there was a lot of crossover with a lot of the same guest actors showing up on this show. I mean, I don't remember them all, but I definitely remember, I forget the actor's name, but the actor that played Dr. Lovelace, of course, who was a little person. I forget his name, but the one that played Dr. Lovelace on Wild Wild West, I believe he's the same actor who played, he was in Children of Plato. He's the little person in that episode, I believe. What was his name? I can't remember it. And Harvey's Vintage Audio remembers the theme tune. Yeah, I remember that opening sequence, with the animation. I don't remember the music specifically. Okay, once free of her studio contract. Okay, I read that. So she said, I came in for an audition and all I got to see were just a couple of pages of the script. I really didn't know anything about the show and I knew nothing about the script. I just knew my part and that I was supposed to be Dr. McCoy's love interest. I read with Joe DaGosta, who read McCoy's lines. He was a doll and so nice. Gene Roddenberry and Gene Coon were there. And I remember that I didn't have to go back for a second reading. I knew I got the job. Oh, Michael Dunn. Is that it? Okay. Michael Dunn. Bruce Mars, who played Finnegan, this would be one of 3 appearances on Star Trek for him, said, quote, I came from New York as every other actor did, where I had appeared in summer stock and off-Broadway things, then showed up in California with those credits behind me and a few numbers of people to call. And for some reason, the karma was good, and I went to work now and then, in between starving and trying to feed my dog. I'd known Joe DaGosta from when he was casting Rawhide, and we hit it off, and he gave me a little role there. He was just a super guy. We kept in touch, and he got me the meeting at Star Trek. Mars tried out for the role of Lieutenant Bailey in the Corbomite maneuver, but director Joseph Sargent preferred Anthony Call for that role. To help keep Mars and his dog from starving, DaCosta gave the struggling actor a day's work as a background extra, playing a crewman in that episode. DaGosta was determined to find something worthy of Mars's talents. And then along came this character, Mars recalled, and Joe said, come on in and do a reading for this. So I went in and just nailed that baby, and I got the job right on the spot. Mars did indeed nail Finnegan, and DaGosta would bring him back as a bewildered 20th century cop in the second season episode Assignment Earth. Oliver McGowan, who played the caretaker, was 59. He had over 100 filmed appearances between 1957 and 1970, usually playing doctors, military officers, sheriffs, and governors. Perry Lopez as Esteban Rodriguez was 35. He would amass around 100 credits in both film and on TV starting in 1954. Along with Zorro and Wagon Train, he had noticeable parts in features such as 1962's Taras Bulba. From there, he went on to play the prominent role of Lieutenant Escobar in Chinatown and its sequel, The Two Jakes. I didn't realize that. Barbara Baldwin played uh, crewman Tellers, or sorry, played Angela Martine, the grieving bride to be in the episode Balance of Terror. And this time, she's the one who gets killed, at least temporarily, after being repaired by the caretaker. Of course, her husband was Joe DaGosta, who was the casting director, and so she would get more than one appearance on Star Trek. Shirley Bond, who played Ruth, looked older than 20. Yeah, she clearly is not that young. The age Kirk remembered his former flame to have been. Bond was actually 31, and she made the rounds on TV between 1960 and 69, with stops including episodes of Mannix and That Girl. As the production dates approached, okay, so Harvey says, will the stream stay up as I need to get to sleep? It's nearly midnight here in London. I will watch the rest tomorrow. Yes, I will. After it ends, I will post it on my channel, Harvey's Vintage. So if you want to come back and see it later, it will be here. All right, and thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it, and thank you for subbing. I hope you get the rest you need. Thank you. Okay, as the production dates approached, Roddenberry, having suffered from a bout of exhaustion, took a break. He left behind a memo telling Gene Coon how Stan Robertson at NBC felt the script leaned too much towards fantasy and wanted a few of the more fantastic sequences reined in. But in his haste to leave for his own shore leave, Roddenberry failed to have the memo delivered to Gene Coon. Production began on Wednesday, October 19th of 66. Roddenberry returned from his R&R that morning and found the memo he had intended for Coon still on his desk. A copy of the shooting script was next to it. In the opening teaser, as it had been all in the previous drafts, was the large white rabbit who can tell time and talk. Since there were no cell phones at this time, Roddenberry hightailed it out to Africa, USA, which was over an hour's drive from Desilu. William Shatner recalls, quote, "I can still remember him roaring up on our production vehicles in a cloud of dust." It was too late to nix the talking white rabbit, as that had been the first sequence that was filmed that day. But other story elements from Theodore Sturgeon's fertile imagination were soon altered. Roddenberry found a shady tree and began rewriting the script on a yellow legal pad. The changes had to be driven to Desilu for typing and then copied in the Mimeo department and then driven back out to location for the actors. Fax machines, like cell phones, were still in the future. George Takei said, "I recall we had a lot of script problems. There was one point where we were actually shut down production and waited for the rewrites to be driven out. I had my running shoes, so I went out and got a good run in. Some people took their shirts off and worked on their tans, but once the pages arrived, we had to work quickly." Bruce Mars recalled, "Theodore Sturgeon had written the Finnegan character, so he was a little nasty and moody. And I read that and I thought this could be better. I'd like to make this guy more fun, not nasty, just a bit annoying, and bring him to life in a more fun way." So I had a good talk with Bob Spar, and he said, "You'll have to go higher to make those kind of changes." And that normally meant Mars would have to talk to one of the producers who usually aren't available on the shooting locations. But as it would turn out, Roddenberry was there doing the rewrites, and he talked with both the director and with Roddenberry, and actually Theodore Sturgeon came out to the set or out to the location as well, and so he talked with all of them, and they all approved the changes he wanted to make, which is how we got the Finnegan that we got. Um, oh yeah, and another thing that the network wanted removed was the tiger. They didn't want the tiger in it, but again, because the memo wasn't sent, the tiger wasn't cut out, and so the tiger stayed in the episode. And also, part of it was because they were worried about possible legal action if the tiger wound up mauling somebody on set, like an actor or a crewman or whatever. William Shatner, unlike Justman, saw no need for concern and was hot on the idea of Kirk wrestling the tiger. Uh-huh. He felt the action sequence would be good for the episode until he saw the 150-pound animal tearing into its midday snack, a large chunk of uncooked meat on a bone about the size of a man's thigh. And then the tiger got loose. "I'll never forget it," said Bill Blackburn. "One of the grips was carrying a reflector, and he tripped, and somehow all of a sudden the tiger just went berserk. The tiger had a chain around its neck, but the chain came off of its tether. Eddie Paskey, who was Shatner's stand-in for the lighting setups, wasn't about to stand against a tiger. As he remembers, Bill was like 6 feet from this thing when the chain came off, and of course went nuts. Everybody went nuts. In my mind's eye, I can still see Shatner jumping on top of this big prop box. Everybody else was like transfixed, and they didn't know whether to run or not. And then the trainer came running in and got a hold of the chain. It was one of those things that could have turned out really bad." Shatner recalls, "Instantly my testicles rose up into my Adam's apple, and the ignorant machismo which had been pulsing so heartily through my veins was replaced by sheer abject terror. I stood there trying not to look too horrified as I gracefully backed down for the good of the show." I love how he says, "Oh, I backed down for the show, not because I was saving my own life," but whatever. Uh, Bruce Mars recalls, Bob told me that Gene Roddenberry wanted the fight expanded, and ZX likes that. And thank you for stopping by, ZX. I appreciate it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. Bob told me that Gene Roddenberry wanted the fight. Bob told me that Gene Roddenberry wanted the fight expanded, that he felt it would be good for the show and make a great visual of me and the captain fighting. So he said, Bruce, make it rough and tumble. I really enjoyed Shatner in that. We talked about the fight and with Bob Spar about working out some moves. This will happen here and this will happen there, and the stuntman will do this and you will do that. Shatner was very nice to me, asking me what I was doing and what I wanted to do. You really never know what to expect, incredible arrogance or whatever, but I do remember thinking this guy is a really good guy. And he made sure I had a couple of good scenes during the fight. He'd say, "Let's do this and let's do that," and no, no, the camera should be here, not there. And he would go talk to Bob Spar about it. So he got me some good moments, and I have nothing but good things to say about working with Shatner. Well, hey, see, at least somebody who worked on the original show liked Shatner. Not everybody who worked on it hated him. Okay. I'll skip that part. Okay, so Justman told Gene Coon that he was particularly impressed with the work of Bruce Mars and Emily Banks as Finnegan and Yeoman Barrows. He felt that Barrows in particular came off as a person that people would like to see again, and the rapport between her and McCoy should be explored in future episodes. Coon, however, was not in agreement. He felt the flirtation between her and McCoy, as directed by Spar, had gone a bit too far. If Yeoman Barrows returned, that implied relationship would have to be dealt with. The easy solution, Emily Banks was not offered any more work. Bruce Mars would be for season two's assignment Earth. Justman's letter to Coon wrote, I think that Shore Leave was probably the most entertaining Star Trek show we have produced to date. I am probably alone in my opinion, but I am telling the truth as I see it. It needed to be the most entertaining Star Trek show produced to date. It cost enough. With the reduced budget from Desilu down to 185,000 per episode from 193,500, episodes such as Shore Leave would be few and far between. This one came in at about $199,654 or about 1.5 million today. And I would point out this book was written a decade ago, so God knows how much it is now. The series cash surplus, thanks to the savings that came from transforming the cage into the menagerie, now dwindled down to $7,772. On the let's see. Okay, so despite the excellent direction, Robert Spar had fallen out of favor with some. Bruce Mars shares the following quote, I know there were some grumbles. Some of the actors weren't thrilled with Bob Spar and how he handled things, but I loved him. I thought he did a great job. He knew what he wanted to shoot, but he must have rubbed a few of them the wrong way with some of his shots. I remember they laid two sets of track for different dolly shots to have Shatner running after me. I wouldn't say there was friction, but I could feel an undercurrent there that perhaps taking the time to shoot with the dolly and making Shatner do all that running was considered a bit too much. So one gets the impression that it wasn't really people or actors that were displeased with Spar so much as it was a particular actor who I won't name. Justman was right, and Spar would not return. Sadly, the director was killed in so Spar would die in a plane crash just 3 years later while scouting locations with Star Trek cinematographer Jerry Finnerman. The pilot also was killed. Finnerman was the only survivor, but he was severely injured. Okay, so this episode premiered on. Hello, Linda Reynolds. Thank you for stopping by. Good episode. Yes, this is definitely one of the better episodes in Star Trek, one of the more entertaining ones. Um, but there are so many good episodes in this first season. I mean, there really are. There's really only a couple that I think are not good. Miri being one of them. That Miri's the only one I would say so far that I've looked at and said this is just I don't like it. Okay, so it premiered on Thursday, December 29th of 66, and the first half hour came in second in its time slot with a 29% audience share behind The Dating Game, which had a 33.1 share. And yes, Sir Equinox. Yeah, written by Theodore Sturgeon. Yeah, I did mention that earlier. But yeah, he was a noted sci-fi author at the time again, and Roddenberry was very keen to have him because he was considered a good get, I guess, for the show. And Roddenberry was very keen to get respected sci-fi authors writing on the show in order to give Star Trek credibility. All right, and then the second half hour of Shore Leave actually won its time slot with a 32.6% audience share, just narrowly beating out Bewitched. Now, the amusement park that was seen in this episode would be visited again for an episode of the Star Trek cartoon in the episode Once Upon a Planet. The animation on that show allowed for some of Theodore Sturgeon's original concepts to be realized, such as the mechanical arms that came up out of the ground from trapdoors to take the bodies away. Entertainment Weekly, in its 1995 special issue devoted to Star Trek, ranked this episode as being the 17th best from the original series. Also, one final footnote. In January of 1969, Los Angeles was hit by a torrential storm. This caused severe flooding on Ralph Helfer's Africa USA game preserve. Most of the animals perished in the storms and flooding, and mudslides rendered the location unusable for future filming. The Helfers subsequently moved away, and the destroyed ranch would remain unoccupied until 1987, so nearly 20 years, when actress and animal advocate Tippi Hedren would purchase the land and use it as an animal preserve again. And also, I believe, and I'll talk about this, I believe, in the episode Arena, but Vasquez Rocks, a few years later, was purchased by the city of Los Angeles, I believe, and turned into a state park. Bruce Mars said, I loved working with those guys. It was so much fun. It was great on the set. DeForest Kelly was extremely nice, asking me how I was and if I had worked in New York and so on. Nimoy was a little reserved, very contained, not outgoing. He was the guy. He really was Spock. But he was nice when you would speak to him, and he nailed that character. He really had it down. Emily Banks said, they said something about bringing me back, but then they never did anything about it, so that was that. And I didn't see it right away because I normally didn't look at anything that I did. But then in the late 80s, one of my husband's friend's sons called and said, Emily, you're on Star Trek. You're in one of the classics. And I said, oh, yeah, I was. Um, And then shortly after that, my godmother and her son came over for Christmas, and he brought me the episode, which had just been released on VHS. So I finally had a chance to sit down and watch it. And I thought, wow, this is really good. I really liked it. Okay. Where am I at? Yeah, so I'm right about at an hour. So I'll go ahead and wrap this up there. And as I said before, yeah, I will give this episode an A minus grade. I think definitely one of the better episodes in this season. Although it does have a few minor flaws, but again, I think that's down to it partly to the editing and the show kind of having stuff cut out for time, which sometimes you just can't avoid. All right, so I will wrap up here. Now, next week, I'll do another Trek Talk again, and that will be covering the Squire of Gothos. next Tuesday. Now, I will not be streaming this Sunday night like I usually do because I'm going to be with my National Guard unit this weekend, so that won't happen. Um, but I do want to thank everyone who tuned in for the stream and those who will watch on a rewatch. And thank you to the folks who have been subbing. I did finally pass 1,000 subs. I believe it was this past, was it Sunday? I think it was Sunday. Early Sunday afternoon, I passed 1,000 subs. So thank you to everyone who has subbed for that. And again, I'll see you all next week and have a good evening. And thanks for watching.